Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs and this is Sally Ann Sack. And today we're going to talk about a lot of different little things that aren't enough to make a show, but at the same time are things that we want to bring out and point out to people.
The tidbits.
Yeah, little tidbits that are new. One of the things we've talked about lately is DNA. And we've done several shows on it. And we've talked about something called the Worth Group and how they think they might have Spanish ancestors. And we'll be doing another show on that in the future, but right now they've asked that we put it off until they complete their findings.
Right.
But then I found something very interesting the other day in the Smithsonian magazine, which was about a doctor in southern Colorado who had a lot of women that had breast cancer. And when they did a DNA test, they found that these people were carrying a particular gene, I guess is what you'd call it. I'm not ever sure of the technical terms. That's the only other place that's found is in the Ashkenazic women of Eastern Europe. And you know, there have been many articles that there's a propensity for certain women to have breast cancer.
Right.
And which again leads you to think of a lot of things. And Dr. Stanley Hortis, who I gather is a distant relative of yours, had some years ago already pointed out that many of the people in the Southwest United States were probably descendant of Jews that had run away from Spain and during the Inquisition. And this seems to point to that. I mean, there's no proof yet.
Except, interestingly, Arlene, and that relates to the Worth Group, the breast cancer gene that we've all been hearing about is Ashkenazi Jews. That's supposed to be the Jews of Europe. But then when you spoke of Jews running away from Spain, well, yes, Spain is in Europe, but in the Jewish tradition, they belong to the other large group, the Sephardic group, which makes you wonder if the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic really fall down and merge in a lot of places, as that is what happened with what we think may have happened with the Worth Group. But you know, the thing about, and there's another DNA study that's of a similar type, or one that I'd like to start. There's some people in southern Peru, or Ecuador rather, who have a rare hearing disorder, which is only known, I'm told, to exist also in Jews who lived in Spain.
Really?
Yes, same thing.
But again, it's the same kind of thing. They could be from these Jews
right,
that left.
Because there was the Spanish Inquisition actually was exported. This part of Ecuador once was part of Peru. And there were so many hidden Jews who ran away from Spain during the colonial period that the Spanish Inquisition opened an office of the Inquisition in Peru. So, yes, but just I think for people who missed our show about the Worth Group, we should just say a few words, which is that when the DNA testing began, a number of men who do Jewish genealogy sent their DNA in and learned that they all had identical patterns, and that the patterns were because of two rare factors, are extraordinarily rare. Yeah. And the group has grown and grown. These people have a common ancestor. They now know it wasn't all that far back, maybe 400 years ago. Then we find there was everybody in that group is either Jewish today or knows that the family was Jewish, with one exception, and we found her, or we learned about her. And it's a woman here in Northern Virginia who's from Puerto Rico, and she did her father's DNA thinking she would get some kind of pattern that was typical of Africans, actually. And lo and behold, he's got the same pattern that all these Jewish men whose ancestors came from Lithuania or southeast Poland, the area of Galicia. So now the thought is, well, was there some secret Jew who ran away to Puerto Rico when Jews weren't allowed to live openly in Puerto Rico, and was the ancestor of her father's line? So that's what they're going to try to check.
But remember, her husband also had Jewish ancestry,
right?
And so
by DNA testing.
By DNA testing, in that family, they seem to know that But some of the members of that Worth Group now do have the oral history that their family originally were Sephardic. And
Two of them do have that, yes.
So there's this possibility that what we call at least a part of what we call the Ashkenazi group actually came from Spain originally.
Sure. We know that migration.
And the other part, went to other places.
Sure.
And so it just takes that one ancestor back 500 years that spawned all of these people that are everywhere.
Well, we know the pattern when the Jews ran away from the Spanish Inquisition. Some went to Amsterdam, and from Amsterdam to Hamburg, and from Hamburg into Eastern Europe. There are some known. That's where it's very valuable. The thing about the DNA testing is that it always makes me think of what happened to psychoanalysis, Freudian psychoanalysis in the 1940s. So I'm an analyst. It was highly oversold, and everybody thought it could do everything. And when, of course, it couldn't, then there was a great disappointment. We mustn't oversell what DNA can tell us yet. I mean, I know that I'm related to Stanley, or my Amder males are related to Stanley Diamond about 29 generations back. It's not going to tell me a lot. What I've used it for that's been useful is on the web. I have an Amder website. That's my maiden name. And over the years, I've collected all these Amders, and I know their branch, their mini trees, but I don't know if they connect to what I call the main trunk. So we've been testing. And we have found several who do connect to the main trunk, as I do, and a couple that don't. And the couple that don't are very wrought up. And we murmur, Bennett Greenspan, the head of Family Tree DNA, says, well, there's always the question of unrecorded paternity.
But remember that the thing that it came across too, it could be, we didn't have last names over 200 years ago. So it could be that a male took the wife's family
Well, that's
name.
the other point. It comes up routinely, is you have to remember that parents, there were a lot of deaths of parents. Mothers died in childbirth. It was common for a husband to remarry, a wife to remarry, and a man might be bringing up children who were from the first marriage. In my family we have. And so they took the other last name. So we don't know if that family in Puerto Rico,
it could have been.
We don't know anything.
But there's another interesting thing that I just found out yesterday. I didn't even have a chance to email it to you. The AARP has an article which is very interesting, talks about DNA.
What do they want to say about it?
Without naming names, I think they're talking about the Wirth group.
Oh, how fascinating. That has gotten a lot of attention.
Yes, because you just know that because we know about it. But it's the fact that AARP is not picking it up, and it does a lot of other things.
What it can tell you, in certain rare cases, within what we call genealogical time, the last, maybe to the 1700s or even the 1600s, that you have a common ancestor. There it then becomes very useful, or as in my Amder thing, when the last name is all the same. Yeah. And you can test it out.
But it's interesting too how I begin to see the merging of just doing genealogy and the medical side of it. I mean, we're coming from two different locations. One from the medical, from the Colorado Smithsonian article, and the other from pure genealogy, and we're both pointing towards the same possibility.
Yes. Oh yes. Many years ago, I spoke to a woman who is at Hadassah Hospital in Israel, who's very interested in biological medical disorders that are passed down in families. And what she was pleading for, she said, what we need is a database of reliable Jewish genealogies. And that's what my institute in Israel wants to do, because they want to be able to trace people genealogically who show up with these mutations, as Stanley Diamond has done with the beta thalassemia trait.
So we've got the beta thalassemia, we've got the breast cancer now. Sure. So we'll be getting more when you think about it, nobody even heard of using DNA for anything 10 years ago. It's all so new.
Mostly we hear about it for people who've been wrongly convicted and are languishing in our prisons. Well, that's a very important one.
Yes, it's certainly very. Let's look at some of the other things
that have been happening.
Yeah, Ancestry.com is, of course, a very well-known company. It's a pay-for company. Here in Fairfax County, you can get it for free by going to your library, because each library has one or two stations only that connect to it. It's very expensive otherwise to connect to it. But they've done a lot. They've really expanded a lot.
Yes, they've. they've done the major thing that we heard this summer, of course, is that JewishGen, which is the major Jewish genealogy presence on the web, has signed an agreement which will permit Ancestry, it's licensing the use of some of its databases on the Ancestry site.
But with a provision that you don't have to pay for them, isn't it?
No, you don't have to pay.
Because you don't pay for them on JewishGen.
Yeah, but what they anticipate is that it will open up the market to many, many people who have found out that they have a Jewish ancestor and they don't know what to do or where to go or how to do genealogy. So Ancestry will soon have on its site a page about how to do Jewish genealogy. And it's expected, therefore, that the market, that the audience of people who have had a Jewish ancestor and have never been able to trace that will suddenly open up, and they'll have more help with that.
I think up to this point, Ancestry has been pretty well focused on the U.S., at least when I've looked at it. It's pretty much U.S., so I haven't had much to look up on it. But now they're really expanding not only to the Jewish end of it, but to the British subsidiary is partnering with the City of London, and they're going to put some of the historical records online. 500 years of the city's history is going to go on, and they estimate it'll be 77 million people.
Archival information. Yeah, it's going to take many years. But the initial records are going to be parish records, poor law document, I wonder what that is, and school admissions. Dating from Victorian times to 1911. Marvelous.
So that's all, again, we just talked about copyright. It's well beyond anything that's copyrightable.
So the privacy law people in Europe, the privacy people in Europe are going to be very worked up, as we know.
Well, it's so old that you know, it's more than 100 years old, or almost 100 years old, so.
Yeah, that's true.
97 years old, you know, if they were to put it on.
Well,
tomorrow.
Except if it goes to 1911, it would have picked up the birth of my parents.
Yeah, but it's probably assuming that the date our parents aren't alive anymore.
Right, but yeah.
So,
but
I mean, they would be 100 years old.
But the reason I'm bringing that up is that the current issue of Avotino has an article by a French genealogist who's very concerned about the internet and putting family trees on the internet, most of them being put up by Americans, and there's information on them about his family that he thinks is improper to put up.
Well, I mentioned on another show that I found that my whole family was on there, and certainly was not put on by me, and I was very upset about it. But again, somebody else put it on.
It's the flip side of the interest in genealogy. You maybe lose it. What else is Ancestry doing? Anything else? Australians, they've got some.
The Australian passenger lists from New South Wales, and the unassisted immigrant list from 1826 to 1922 is also going to be on Ancestry.com.
So those aren't the first fleet. Those aren't the or are they the?
I think those are. Well,
yes, 1820. You know, that first the first European settlers were these convicts.
Convicts, yeah, and there were Jews among those too.
Right, I know. So those give the name of the passenger, the year of birth, port of departure, port of arrival, arrival date, vessel name, origin of town or country. So that's a very, and they also have Canadian passenger lists.
From 1865 to 1935, so that's even a little bit later. They estimate 7 million names.
Ancestry is Ancestry's primary interest is the collection of databases, and they are very vigorous. It's quite a
Are they
growing.
Connected with the Mormon Church?
They are not connected with the Mormon Church. One of the founders is a Mormon, but actually I think maybe the CEO is Jewish. Right now, and it has no connection with the Mormon Church. They are located in Utah, but they want everybody to know that they are unaffiliated. They are commercial operation, pure and simple. But they have put a lot of records of
other records. These are Canadian city directories from 1818 to 1899, and Missouri birth records, and Missouri death records. And again, this is available at Fairfax County and Ancestry.com. Do want to say most of the things that we are talking about, other than the DNA, comes from Avotenu.com website, the /NU new, and it's a free email that Gary Mogotov puts out. And anybody
every 2 weeks, we call it our e-zine. It's how shall I say it? Avotenu, our journal, comes out 4 times a year. Well, there's lots of little things that happen in between that don't merit a full article.
Just like Don't Marry the TV show that we're doing today.
Right,
yeah.
and so we have this every 2 weeks. It's called New What's New, and it's
new is NU, which is a Yiddish word.
Right, and it's a Yiddish sort of act, right, and it's just these little tidbits of new things that are happening. And one of the ones that you picked up was this, the new Vader Morse phonetic algorithm for matching names.
Yeah.
One of the problems with, Dage Mokotov has been the Soundex approach that we've used for all these Jewish databases for years. One of the problems is it picks up a lot of false hits, and you have to scroll through a lot of stuff. Vader, using his brilliance, has figured out ways to group names from different languages, and this system will cut down a lot on the false positives. So there are some things it can't do that Dage Mokotov can do.
So really somebody needs to check both of them, or do first one and then the other, and then look at both of them?
Probably with the Vader Morse first, and then if you don't find what you want, go to the Dage Mokotov Soundex.
And by the way, all of the web pages that we are mentioning will be listed on our website, which is tracingroots.nova.org. So anybody can look at our shows there and look up. And
I have to say, I have to claim the rights as godmother of the Vader Morse because it was developed as part of the project for the destroyed communities that I'm heading for the new Institute on Jewish Genealogy. We need this software that doesn't exist, and we got these geniuses together, and they have worked on this.
Yeah, I know you were talking last year already about needing to get
those two in the same room, and I got them in the same room. But the National Archives also has published some new online indexes, haven't they? Or lists?
They're the Germans to America, the Irish famine, Italians to America, Russians to America. I'm not quite sure how they separated that. Is that just
that was Ira Glazer did those works, remember?
That's from those books?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then all of those books that were published,
it's a country of origin. What he's at the Balch Institute in Philadelphia, and he got copies of all the arrival records, and working with his students forever and ever, they clustered these groups. The one, I don't know if it's true for all of them. I do remember that there are a great many errors in them, in the German one. And I don't remember if it was errors of omission or commission. And the same is true of the Russian one. If you don't find who you're looking for, don't assume that they weren't there. For example, I know I picked up on the Russians to America, there were several ships that were never indexed. So this is a good place to start, but it's definitely not inclusive, all-inclusive, and it certainly has some errors.
We've never been able to find any of Sid's ancestors who did come in this time period.
Well,
either the ones from Germany or the other side that came from Russia. And in these books, we've never been able to find any trace of them. And
your husband's ancestors were so good at hiding.
Yeah, they were. They
were excellent. That was
the one that came before the Civil War or during the Civil War, sometime in that period, we haven't been able to find, other than Germany.
Well, you remember the story I love to tell about my grandfather with the name that wasn't his?
Yeah.
And he didn't tell until he was on his deathbed. Yes, they were interested in hiding a lot of our ancestors.
Well, they feared the government in the countries they came from, and when they had a chance to not tell everybody everything over here, that was the easiest thing for them to do.
And if you look at the early records, the early American records are not nearly as detailed.
No.
The immigration records say they came from Bavaria. They don't say where in Bavaria. So I think the United States, it was the frontier. You could come here and start all over again. You could be anyone you wanted to be.
That's right, and America was glad to have people. I mean, just like in the beginning, Australia was glad to have people.
One of my favorite stories was told by a rabbi, our congregation, now deceased. His wife's maiden name was Rothschild. Was she related? No. Here's the story. Her grandfather came to America. He got off the ship in New York. He looked and he said, the land of the free. A person can be anybody in this country. You can even be a Rothschild. And then he said, I'm going to be a Rothschild. So he took the name Rothschild.
I mean, you could do or be anything that you wanted.
And so this was, how these names came about. But I wanted to mention, while we were talking about the National Archives, the issue of Avotenu that's coming out, hopefully it'll be in your mailbox this week, has an article by Edward Luft about the new genealogy program at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. That's the place where you write if you want to find out about the naturalization records of your relatives. And in the past, you wrote a Freedom of Information request. Wrong. Well, that had problems because we waited a long time.
Yeah.
Well, there's now a new genealogy program. You pay a fee.
Yeah,
they're promising that the service is going to be faster, but Marion Smith, who's the acting director, wants everyone to know that there's something called the shakedown period or whatever.
She was overwhelmed because she was going to do a show with us, and she said she'll do it later.
Right. So it's important to go to their website or to read the article in Avotenu to find out all the details about how it's done and what you should.
But be aware that it's too late to get it free anymore.
No, if you have a query that you have submitted to the Freedom of Information Office and they haven't answered, you may leave it there if you want, though you may wait another year and a half. Those they will honor, or you can switch it over and pay the additional fee. Apparently Congress mandated that they charge fees for public service things. You're supposed to, we laid the golden egg and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, there's so much. The Freedom of Information offices have been overwhelmed with things like genealogy, which wasn't anticipated.
They didn't want to keep hiring more people to do that when it's really not part of running the government, and I can understand it in a way. I hate to pay it, but I can understand it.
Right, exactly.
Do you know what the fee is?
It's 20 or 30. I mean, it's enough that you say, it's not cheap. At least I didn't think it was cheap. And then, what's this about the German government?
Well, I guess the German government has released lists of Jewish residents during the Holocaust period.
This is not the Gedenkbuch?
The Gedenkbuch would be those who were killed.
Oh, so this is everybody who were persecuted. Yes,
persecuted and subject to discrimination by the National Socialist regime, and
600,000
is a fraction of what the total is. So I don't.
Well,
understand.
By 1933, it's from 33 to 45. People were getting out if they could possibly get out.
I know, but my father was there in 33, but. I don't know when, like the 1938 census there didn't really get taken until 1939, even though it's called 1938. Now
this one is not online, but they're going to make it available to Yad Vashem and to the Holocaust Museum and to the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen. So
there isn't any mention of internet access yet, but I guess given that some people are still living. I don't know.
But you also, I heard a talk in Chicago given by a man from Canada. He was talking about the Latvian Jewish database, and he said, talking about databases, he does this marvelous, it's like a Jack Benny comedy, about how hard it is to keep up with what's online. That the minute you write it down, you're out of date, and next day there's 10 more. And now I see that there's cemeteries from the United Synagogue in Great Britain, a whole flock of them, their burials are online?
Their burials online, burials in New York, from Mount Lebanon Cemetery, Mount Judah Cemetery, Mount Ararat, Carmel, Hebron.
That must be Steve Lasky's material. He's working hard.
I'm not sure offhand without looking up.
Right, I see that. You wrote that down. But there's, British Cemetery JPEG. Oh, on this
within that cemetery.
That's the other thing.
Within that web page, I mean.
Finding things within web pages is a whole art, I've decided.
And sometimes even when you have the whole database, it won't let you go directly. I mean, when you have the whole URL, it won't let you go directly to that spot. And then you go back to the main page and you say, how in the world do I get there from here? And you're jumping around, and I'm not very good at doing that kind of research.
And also, Jewish birth, death, and marriage records from the Lvov archive are recatalogued?
They're recatalogued. This is data that they had, but they're sort of changing the way in which they I guess
that's very important, because that archive has the largest collection of Eastern European Jewish records of any archive. But I noticed that you marked down for us to talk about something that Gary Mokotov wrote in New What's New about, do I have Jewish ancestry? Yeah. And I just asked you to cross that out and say, do I have Christian ancestry? Because he was talking about the Mormon IGI, which is really, it's called the International Genealogical Index, but it's not genealogical.
It's just from the people that have submitted names and...
Or they have collected names.
Yeah.
It's a list of people who are dead and who have been posthumously baptized Mormon. And that's what that list is. And what you can tell if you find names on that list, since they baptize Jews too, which is a whole thing that makes people unhappy, but it has more than 700 million names. If you find a name, and it will say what the source is, if it's a baptismal record, you can be sure it wasn't a Jewish ancestor. So
no, because if they baptized it, wouldn't that be the baptismal?
No, if the original record they used.
Okay.
See, most of the records, most of the names in the IGI are not submitted by people saying, here's my tree. They're submitted, they are Mormon volunteers who are using the records that they've acquired and extracting names from them. So if they have parish records, church records, they write down that it's a church record.
We've just about run out of time. There's also the Family Tree of the Jewish People database to look up and see if your name appears.
That is excellent. That's an excellent source.
But we're really out of time, so we don't have any more time to talk about anything else. And I hope this gives people an idea. And if you look on tracingroots.nova.org, you'll see links to all the web pages we've talked about.
Good.